The year is 1929. America is booming. Skyscrapers rise, jazz plays, money flows, people buy new cars and clothes, travel to far-off lands, dance the Charleston all night long. The US economy is the greatest the world has ever seen. Well, during the 1920s, people became convinced that the economic boom would never end. Consumer debt skyrocketed. It was a time of false prosperity. People sold their stocks in mass, and the stock market began to plummet. People rushed to take their money out of banks, but were told that their money was gone. Well, first of all, there were just too many people with too much debt. He launched a series of public works programs to put people back to work. "Name me that nation," he said, "which has written its constitution in the hope of securing the blessings of this earth for any one generation to come." We Americans have the staunch purpose to bring about a better understanding and a better cooperation among all the nations of the world in achieving these ends. We do not propose to enter into any alliance which shall bind our hands or our feet or our thoughts to any other nation or any group of nations. He reformed the banking system to restore confidence in the economy, and he created a social safety net to protect Americans from the worst effects of the Depression. The Great Depression wasn't just an American phenomenon, it went global. Others say it lasted until the start of World War II, which jump-started production, created jobs, and helped the economy grow again. But it was also a time when people came together and helped each other out. It was a time when people showed the true meaning of resilience. Whatever the case, recovery was slow and painful. The economy didn't really rebound until the 1940s. In fact, the global economy shrank by 27% between 1929 and 1933. Trade collapsed. Currencies failed. Nations turned inward. Farmers in France rose up and seized the streets of Paris. Well, first of all, we learned that unchecked capitalism can lead to disaster. We learned that people aren't just numbers on a screen. You can watch the next episode right here. Thanks for watching. See you next time. They're human beings with hopes and dreams and families. We also learned that government does have a role to play in our lives. We don't need a big government that tells us what to do, but we do need a government that protects us from the worst excesses of capitalism. Finally, we learned that no matter how bad things get, we can always pull through if we work together. Times are hard. The best of times have gone. Bread lines grow. The soup kitchens all are set to feed the hungry. And in the shadows, thousands shiver. They call us names. These people who have plenty say we're bums, and that's our game. Oh, brother, can you spare a dime? Workers in Germany rioted and demanded that the government take action. The economic collapse helped fuel the rise of fascism in Europe, including the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany. Soon, another crisis would engulf the world. Some of his programs were controversial, like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put young men to work planting trees and fighting forest fires. Others were more controversial, like the Works Progress Administration, which employed people to build roads and bridges and public buildings. High winds swept across the plains and carried away the topsoil, creating massive dust storms. Crops withered and died. Farmers abandoned their land and headed west. Families packed up what little they had left and piled into cars, trucks and buses, and headed to California in search of a better life. These migrant workers swelled the ranks of the homeless and unemployed. Cities struggled to provide food and shelter for everyone in need. More than 500,000 people were on the road. It was called the Dust Bowl, but they all had one thing in common. They were designed to help people in need. People bought things they couldn't afford on credit, and then those people turned around and invested that same money into the stock market. But when the stock market crashed, everybody lost their money and they couldn't pay back their debts. Secondly, there was a huge gap between the rich and the poor. While the richest people got to enjoy the benefits of the economic boom, most Americans were barely getting by. The average worker's wages didn't keep up with inflation during the 1920s, meaning that people were actually poorer at the end of the decade than they were at the beginning. Thirdly, there was no regulation. There was no safety net. If you lost your job, if you got sick, if your farm foreclosed, it wasn't anybody else's problem. It was your problem. They watched in horror as their life savings vanished into thin air. Families were torn apart. Farmers who had worked the land for generations lost their farms. Children went hungry. Unemployed men stood on street corners looking for work. Soup lines in tent cities began to appear across America. Within a few months, 1 out of every 4 Americans was unemployed. By 1932, 25% of the country was jobless. That's the highest unemployment rate of any major country in history. His investors raced to sell before the market closed for the day. Within a few hours, stock prices dropped dramatically. Billions of dollars were wiped out. Banks and businesses failed. People who had money invested in the market lost everything, and the stock market collapse sent shockwaves throughout the entire economy. There were no regulations to ensure that banks kept enough money on hand, or that brokers would behave responsibly. There was no safety net to catch people if they fell. The stage was set for disaster. People bought stocks on margin, meaning they borrowed money from banks to purchase more stock. Banks made money by giving out these loans, so they gave out riskier and riskier loans with very little money down. This meant that if the price of stock went down, then many people would default on their loans. And if a bunch of people defaulted, then the banks wouldn't have enough money to hand out loans to other people. And then eventually the whole thing would come crashing down. So when the stock market crashes on October 29th, 1929, it seems impossible that things could get bad enough to bring down an entire nation. But that day, Black Tuesday, the American dream turns into a nightmare. In less than a few hours, billions of dollars vanish. People who were rich one day are paupers the next. Factories close, farms foreclose, people lose their homes and their jobs. It wasn't just a financial collapse, it was a collapse of trust, of hope, of stability. Hello and welcome to this channel. Today we're going to look at the Great Depression, Part 1, How America Broke Down. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an exciting episode. So how did this happen? How could such a seemingly prosperous country suddenly collapse? In addition to buying stocks on margin, banks were making risky loans to anyone who wanted to buy a house, car, or even a pair of shoes. On October 29, 1929, panic selling hit Wall Street. Over the next few years, more than 5,000 banks collapsed. But how did this happen? How could such a great nation fall so quickly into such a deep depression? What went wrong? In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president. He promised a new deal for the American people. One of FDR's most famous speeches was his first, the inaugural address in 1933. He spoke to a nation in crisis, and he promised action. But while FDR was restoring hope in America, the rest of the world was falling into chaos. But that's a story for another time. During the 1930s, a severe drought struck the Midwest, and then there was this song, "Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?" So, how did the Great Depression finally end? Well, that's a bit controversial. Some say it ended with FDR's death in 1945. The Great Depression was a time of hardship and suffering. It was a time when people lost everything. It was a time when families were torn apart. What are the lessons we must never forget? What would you add to this list? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the thumbs up button and share it with your friends.